So yeah, we're gonna get started right here. Thank you, Lee Wagon, for having us over here today. We are from the Kintone team here at Cybos, based in Tokyo. I'm on the far right there. My name's Sean. And here in the studio with me today is in the middle, Genji.
Hello. I'll be the voice of God occasionally if there's debugging needs.
Our actual workshop today, what we are going to do is talk about Three.JS, how we've set it up to work in React, and kind of like the ways that you can think about writing JavaScript code and working in a 3D space. You know, how is that different from just like, you know, writing p tags in HTML and, you know, posting them on a website, which is, you know, 2D space. So before we really dive into things, I need to make sure that you have downloaded our code, you have git cloned, and we're going to go through some of this repository. We're going to go through getting your own Kintone subdomain and what is Kintone. And then we're going to go through a code walk along like that. So if you have not already, please git clone this repository. Doing this live with you guys. I'm here in my workshops folder and I'm going to git clone my repository. Wow. All right, all done over here. CD into your newly found folder like that, and you're going to npm install, and that is going to install all of our packages and our dependencies that we have here in our project. You could open this up in VS Code first and check in the package.json what kind of packages. They're all very standard except for one special one called Three.JS, you know. So go ahead and run npm install, or if you're, and then the second thing that I need you guys to do is I need you to install globally something called the Kintone Customize Uploader. And this needs to be installed globally in order to work properly. So you're going to do similarly, but you're going to do a -g right here, npm install -g Kintone Customize Uploader. Just copy paste that right into your terminal. All right, guys. So moving along here, so we've set up our project. The next thing that I need you to do, if you have not done it already, so I need you guys to get your Kintone subdomain. And what is a Kintone subdomain? It is your own personal Kintone web space where you can create apps, and it is, you know, 100% free for you guys. And it is going to be something like this. Like I've made sean.kintone.com. This is my homepage, and we're going to make an app together later for our 3D gallery. You guys need to fill out the form right here. And you know, first name, last name, your email. We don't spam email you. The email is just for setting up your account. And just give us a little bit of information about yourself, if you so choose. It helps us know like where we should focus and do this kind of like content, you know. And I don't want to write a bunch of dev.to articles if, you know, like nobody's reading them. And so this really helps me, one, do less work or more work, and you know, it helps you guys also kind of get more targeted information, or other developers around the world, because we do these workshops not only, you know, for you guys here in Tokyo. And the most important thing I think that a lot of people misunderstand is right here, when you create your subdomain, what you type in here, that's going to be your new URL for your subdomain. So here you see like sean.kintone.com. When I made this a couple months ago, I just typed into here, Sean, you know, and that created my subdomain as sean.kintone.com. So you can do whatever you want, you know, make it something personal, you know, or you can make it something cool, or you can make it something about you personally, no problem. Like that. And definitely keep in mind, you know, like kind of what you put in there. It'll be useful later. And later on, when we're doing our code walk along, you will need to enter in your subdomain information, like the URL, for example, and your username and password. Okay. When you make your subdomain also, this email right here is going to be your username at first. A lot of people get kind of confused about that, like, because when you go to log in, let's see if I like just log out real quick, like that, you'll see a screen like this. I've changed my username, but when I first signed up, you know, this was my personal, you know, like Gmail account that I first made this with a long time ago. You can change it later, but the first time when you do this, it's going to be your email that you put in. And you're going to get prompted to make a password. To our next part in the slides. So you've gotten your Kintone subdomain, and here's all the things that I just talked about. Your login will be your email. There's your subdomain name. And also just some extra resources for you guys, because it is hard to kind of like type along and switch screens while I'm just talking. We have a debugging section in the GitHub. If you go to the GitHub and you scroll down in the README, there is debugging, and there's some common errors that you'll find there. There's also these slides that we have. So here is our 3D gallery slides, as we call them. Here's everything that I'm talking about today in a PDF format. And also, if you need like direct directions on how to complete the workshop, for example, in the docs folder, I'm a good dev. I write comments and I make documentation, so to speak. I say good in quotes because I usually don't. But if you click on this right here, you will see like kind of everything that you need to do to get this up and running, and it's really useful. So if you do get lost, then definitely check out the documentation. I tried to make it really easy to understand as well. All right, so we're finally going to get in there. We are going to create a 3D gallery with React, Three.JS, and our Kintone database like that. And pretty much you can see right up here, we got React, that's the Three.js logo, that cool triangle thing, and I found a clip art of a rotating cube, and that's how I made this image, like that. Da-dun! Here's what we're gonna make today. It's amazing, isn't it? It's, I admit, it's not super amazing right at first glance. I think it's actually pretty cool. And it's not cool because of like this, like it looks amazing or it looks super professional. What's cool about this is how little code it took to get up and running and how simple that code was. And I think that's what Three.js like really excels at. So we're going to make this today and consider this like your baby steps, for getting into Three.js, and we'll talk about the concepts of it. But if you want a little bit of inspiration for Three.js, it is used all over the place. It can be used for 3D backgrounds. This background right here that actually in real time shows where people are making pull requests and pull, like opening issues on GitHub. This is made in Three.js. With today's workshop, I hope that you guys can kind of get used to like thinking in 3D spaces and looking at documentation. All right, guys. So to go into the basics of Three.js, and I know this is a lot of text, but bear with me. We have kind of like these 3 things that we're going to be doing today, and they apply to a lot of things in Three.js. We have scenes, and scenes are the universe in which we build in, basically. It is a 3D space where our objects are placed, and I have linked in the slides in the PDF this documentation on Three.js. But think of basically scenes as, like a movie almost. And I think that the Three.js, like when they did their naming conventions, they wanted to make it something familiar to us. So scenes, you'll see cameras and lights, and they all kind of do what you would imagine. A scene is a place in space. And even if you make a place in space, though, if you do not put a camera, then there will be nothing that is able to see. And if you don't put some kind of light source, all you'll see is like pitch black, And so getting used to this kind of thinking is really, really important for Three.js. I know when I was first making this and kind of toying with Three.js, I had like all these cubes and like donuts flying around and they wouldn't show up. I was like, why is it pitch black? I had forgotten lights, obviously. It's so stupid, right? So we'll talk about this more in the code. And then we have meshes. And meshes are going to be what you actually put into this world. They are primary or kind of like basic shapes. They have 2 parts, and that's what we'll be coding together later on. They have geometry, and geometry is, this is kind of what it sounds like. It's the length, it's the width, it's, the radius of the donut that we're making, for example, things like that. And these are actually invisible. You cannot see them until you put on them a material. And a material is kind of like the skin that goes around the geometry, If any of you guys like play video games, you get cool skins for your characters, or like, your cool new weapon has a camouflage skin or something like that. It's basically like that. It's a wrapping around the object that allows you to see it. And we have all kinds of different ones that we're going to talk about today. So to illustrate what I'm talking about, we have our cameras, we have our scene right here kind of showing everything, and then we have these meshes kind of floating around in space. And this is basically what we're going to be making. What is not pictured here is light, and there's many different kinds of light in Three.js. We'll just be using global lights that are already set up for you. But you could do like pointed lights, kind of like a studio. You could have light coming from the left, you could have light coming from the right, all sorts of things as well. And here we have an overview of our repo, and it should look exactly the same for you guys as well. So if I go into my terminal right here and a quick little ls, you can see that. Let me open this up in code. And you can see like we have pretty much everything set up, and we are actually going to be editing only 2 of these files. Everything else that I have kind of made it so it's ready to get up and go. We're going to be editing our index.js file and completing that together. And in order to connect to our Kintone subdomains that you guys just created, we're going to be editing this customize manifest.json. One last thing that I do need to talk about, a .m file is basically a hidden file that's in your directory and part of your project that holds your secrets. It's usually used as a secret repository. You usually do not want to share the contents of your .m file because it'll have things like your API tokens that sometimes you paid money for, right? Or it'll have your login name and your password and things like that. And if you accidentally show your .m file, then someone could just copy and paste your API token. They could rack up a bunch of charges on your Google Maps account. Don't do that ever, by the way. It's just really mean. And we're going to talk about Kintone, what it is. And yeah, I work here, and my job is to promote Kintone, but actually I really do, like I said before, I like the Kintone platform. And I think it's really cool, and it's useful actually in a couple of different ways that I hope that I could explain to you today. At its heart, Kintone is a no-code, low-code cloud platform where people can get together and collaborate on projects, apps, and data efficiently. And it's groupware. And what that means, is you can have multiple people working in a single space on a single amount, record or piece of data like that. And it provides a lot of ways for you to interact with that data. And it also provides a lot of ways for you to talk about that data. And that's what really makes Kintone special, in my opinion. It's the only service that I know about that combines data and conversations in the way that it does. And what I mean by that is, we have apps that we use for handling data, so you have Word documents, PowerPoints, you have your files all up in Google Drive. Sometimes you have these files, but you don't know, what to do with them or what's going on with them or anything like that. On the other hand, you also have these communications apps, right, that we use a lot. We're using one right now. We got Zoom. You have Messenger, Gmail. A lot of you guys, if you're in development kind of things, you're using Slack maybe. When you're using these communication platforms, if someone says on Slack to you, hey, can you fix PowerPoint, May 25th, customer number 35's record in the PowerPoint, where is that file? Where are they talking about in the PowerPoint or things like that? So there's this gap, between the data and the conversations that happen about that data. And Kintone's really cool because it combines these where the data lives like that. So you have a record here, and a record it's just a database entry. If you guys have worked with databases at all, it has, this section, it's API info, some text, Kintone REST API. You can have numbers, you can have objects, things like that. You can have attachments. And the conversations about that data. So you can see over here, the text is kind of small, but you can mention people and say, hey, please take a look at this document. And it never gets to be what document because, it's directly on the same page. This document is the one that I'm talking about. And that's pretty cool. And you can also do process management. And it has this really, really just incredible notifications system. And these kind of built-in tools where you can set up okay, well, Sarah is going to be the one that gets the customer leads. And then when she's done putting them in the database, she clicks on a button and sends it over to, Sarah or Genji for processing of the data, for example, like that. So he actually is the one that makes the call to the customer or something like that. And then he can pass it on to the manager, and the manager can be good job, Genji. You do this via creating apps. And apps are basically kind of really cool, customizable databases on Kintone that you can store information in and customize with JavaScript or these kind of built-in tools that we have. You can display data, make like bar graphs, pie charts. You can analyze data. You can filter the data, which is really cool. And you can do this all with like a no-code, low-code. At first, when I was getting into Kintone, like I, did some development in my previous work history and personally. And I was like, database, I just make that myself, and it's true. Like if you get into coding and stuff like that, you could make out a whole database and then you could, code out the permissions to the database, and then you could code the APIs for getting information to the database, code out some APIs for posting information in the database like that, and do processing. It takes a lot of time, to be honest. And like once I kind of got over the honeymoon phase of like, yeah, I can make a database and I can make an API, I found that I just wanted to get it done with quickly and efficiently and securely. And so that's why actually in my own personal coding adventures like that, sometimes I will go to and just make a quick Kintone database, and it creates the APIs for you. It creates security settings for you. You can spit out an API token, and it just works, so to speak. It does really well is kind of bring people together and allow people to work in a no-code environment, but also have developers kind of create like these command centers where like, yeah, Sharon, she can put together the form, but sometimes you need like some things that only JavaScript can do. And that's where you guys can come in as developers, and you can be like the one JavaScript developer in the company, and you can enable all these other people on Kintone via all these tools. You have JavaScript APIs, REST APIs, you can customize this thing in all sorts of ways. And you can make some things that just aren't possible with codeless. And you can basically allow other people to use your tools in order to do their jobs. And that's a really good feeling, for me as well. Here we have two examples. We created a bubble sort chart just for funsies. And our third team member, Will, he made this little Space Invaders clone and he displayed it in the Kintone app. It's pretty cool. So you guys, as you're growing in your developer and your coding life, you can use, and I definitely recommend like having a basic understanding of databases. But for me, it did come to a point where I was like, I just want to work on the front end and have my APIs and stuff set up for me so I can make something cool. And so using it for self-learning, if you want to focus on front end exclusively, like that's definitely doable. If you want to create revenue, here at Cybils and Kintone, we have a lot of partners, and they create and sell Kintone extensions and become partners. And that is their whole company, basically. They make something that's really cool that allows, people to power up, their Kintone apps with a click of a button, because we have a marketplace where you can sell your extensions. And, suddenly this CRM tool that this one company has, well, with my customization, you can filter all of your leads by age and their t-shirt size, for example, with one click of a button. And there's people that make whole companies around that, and it's pretty cool. So we're going to go into a Kintone database app as well once you've set up. And once you guys log into Kintone, I know I have a lot of slides here, and I've been talking so much. I'm actually going to build this live with you guys right now. Okay, and then we'll get into the React part. I'm doing it in this order because the React basically takes these data and API calls from our app, our Kintone app that we build. So it makes sense to me that we have to create our Kintone app first. If you are more interested in the React content, totally fine. Go take a break or just kind of like listen and have a sip of tea. And we'll get there pretty soon. All right, so if you guys are logged into Kintone, go ahead and click Kintone down here. This is your administration panel. You can get to that in a lot of different ways. Not terribly important. But here we are. And this is my, kind of slightly customized Kintone domain. You might see like, announcements and stuff like that over there, and a couple of other things, but it should look fairly similar to this. And what you're going to do is you're going to click on apps over here and this plus button. And we're going to create our first Kintone app together. So go click on the plus button in the top right, and you're going to see a couple of different ways to like make apps. You can import from Excels and stuff and CSVs if you have existing like database and stuff like that. We're not going to do anything like that today. We're going to create a really simple one from scratch. So go ahead and click Create App from Scratch right there. And you'll get pretty much dropped into here. But I think it shouldn't be too foreign to us, you know. You have a name for your app up here. So I'm going to name my app. You can name it whatever you want. 3D Gallery. Obviously I did this in the past. And we're going to go ahead and create our database like that. And when we're making our Three.js, the overview of our project is that we have these shapes and the shape information living in a database, and we want to display it via React and Three.js. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to have some cubes and some toruses. A torus is just a donut shape, by the way. And we're going to have these cubes and these toruses in our database, and they're going to have properties like length and width and depth. So let's go ahead and create this database for it that would normally take, you know, a really long time. I'm going to take one of these multi-choices and just drop it in. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't that. It was a drop-down, but you know, you could do multi-choice as well if you wanted to be able to create multiple shapes at once. So you have a drop-down here, and if you go up here to settings, you can click on that and you can name it. And we're going to name this one shape type right there. And this name right here will not be referenced outside of our Kintone app, so you can put pretty much anything you want up here, and it's not going to affect our code. What is going to affect our code is these options and this field code. So first let's do options. We're going to have two options for shapes this time, because this is our type of shape, right? Number one is going to be a cube with a capital C. Make sure to do a capital C, because in our code we'll be referencing this, and it's via string comparison. And the other one is going to be torus with a capital T. So we have cubes and we have toruses, aka donuts. And then we have our field code. And what our field code is when we finally use our React app to hook up to this Kintone API, we are going to be referencing this field code. Hey, I need you to go and get the information from my Kintone app's shape type parameter. So what we need to put right here is shape type, like that. And I do camel case right here. Shape type, so lowercase s, uppercase t. And if you wanted to check this like that, in our code, we have a request folder with getRecord.js right there, right? And if you scroll down, we already set up the API call for you, although it only takes this much code. You know, it's pretty easy to do, and I use this as a template every time. But you can see that we're referencing here our shape type, lowercase s, uppercase t. And also we'll have, you know, spoiler alert, we'll have length, width, and depth, okay? Created the shape type dropdown. You've named it, you've put in two options, a cube with a capital C, torus with a capital T, and you've created your field code, shape type in camel case, lowercase s, uppercase t, and saved it. So we're gonna move on. And the next thing that we have to do is our length, width, and depth fields. And these are gonna be numbers, you know, because maybe our length will be, you know, 3, our width will be 4, and our depth will be 1.5, you know, for example. So I'm gonna make 3 number fields right here. And you're going to, once again, go into the settings. Let's name this one length. And you can use Kintone's kind of like built-in things to like easily regulate your data, you know? Like if I didn't want someone to create a rectangle or a cube with a -1 length, which would break my code, you know, you could easily put in here a minimum of 1. Whereas it would take, you know, a little bit of thought and coding in your probably controllers if you were going to do this in a traditional, you know, web app. But we're not going to do anything like that. So we've created our field called length. And our field code is once again going to be length with a lowercase l. Only one word, so no uppercases. We're going to do the same thing, length, width, and depth. Okay, some of you might accidentally put height instead of depth. It's a common source of errors. I've done it a couple times, Genji's done it a couple times. Make sure you do depth, you know, Or if you're more comfortable and you're like, I want to do height, then make sure that you go and edit the code. And you can change depth to height if you so wish. Totally up to you. So we got our width here. And my field code for width is going to be, drum roll, width. Save that. And number here, depth. And the field code is going to be depth with a lowercase d. And save. It'd be a real power move if you changed all instances of depth to height and then submitted a pull request saying that I should change my repo just to conform with you. Thomas, good question. In the UI, does it have any meaning? Nope, none at all. As long as you have your field codes right. We're going to save our form right here. So go ahead and click the green Save Form button. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go into our Views tab. And what a view is when you actually, let me go ahead and activate this app so I can show you. You don't have to do this yet, but you will do it later. See, I have a database here, record number, shape type, length, width, and depth. And what a view is different ways to display this data. And we're going to go ahead and create a custom view that is actually going to display our React and Three.JS app. Okay? If you ever get into this screen, by the way, you can go back to options with the cogwheel. So go ahead and click on views up here. And we're going to create a new view. So plus button seems like a good place to do that. And we're going to call this one our gallery view. You can name it anything you want as long as you understand. And then click custom view. And what this custom view is going to do, it is going to hang off of our a div that we're going to put into our HTML code, and it's going to display our React and Three.js app. You're going to click custom view, and then what you're going to do is somewhere, anywhere is fine, a notepad next to you or a file on your computer, take note of this view ID. You can always find it later because we will need it later. So if you're like, oh, I forgot to write it down, it's fine. It's always going to be here. But you will need to use this later. So if you write it down now, that'll be very convenient later. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to put some HTML code in here. So I'm going to go down here and just find it real quick. There we go. And we're just going to put a div called root. And this is where our React app is going to hang off of, so to speak. There's our view. And we're going to boom, push that in there. We don't need to filter or do anything like that. It's going to be our own custom view. And then click on save for this view. Right there. And then you're going to, mine says update because I already quote unquote activated my app. If yours says update or activate, it's fine either way. Just don't forget to save your changes and update your app. There's been times where I have done a lot of work and then I forget to save my app, which, sucks because then you have to redo everything usually. And so definitely make sure that you save your changes and update the app. Go ahead and make some shapes right here. So click on this plus button right here. And you can create new database entries by hand. Got a cube, and with the way that we have the code set up, I do have some quote-unquote magic numbers in there, just because these are numbers that work kind of well with how I set up the Three.js code. You can change anything, of course. But our camera that I have set up in our code is zoomed out to a z-index of 30. So if you were to put in here like a cube with a length of 300, it's probably going to take up your whole screen because the camera is not that zoomed out, basically. So I recommend, when you put these in, I'm just going to do like 5, 6, 7, just some real nice and simple numbers. If you want to make a gigantic cube, go for it. But you might it might look a little bit ugly until you zoom your camera out or if you adjust the lighting or something like that. Okay. I'm going to make a torus here, 7, 8, 9, sure. For the mathematically kind of advanced people among us, not even that advanced, for the people that are geometrically minded, you might be like, wait a minute, a torus is a donut shape, it doesn't have a length. You're right, you got me. Torus have radiuses, right? That's what circular objects have. They have radiuses and stuff like that, and inner radiuses. In order to keep this workshop pretty simple, we're going to be reusing these numbers of length, width, and depth. But it is totally possible to customize this Kintone app. So when I select torus, this will change and you can fill in a radius and a inner radius field. That's definitely doable. We're going to keep it simple here today. So I have my two shapes right here. And if I go to my all records view right here, you can see that my shapes are in my database. If you go to the gallery view that we just have a blank HTML div that we just put in, there's nothing here. And that's normal right now. We don't have any React code uploaded to our Kintone app yet. I'll give you guys another minute to put in a couple shapes. You can do 2-3 shapes, you know, and I'll move on after that. All right, guys, so I assume that you have a couple of shapes in your database and we are ready to move on. So let's keep on going. Does your app look like this? We've created our custom view, activated our app, we've created records, saved views, go to our custom view, and there's nothing there. So now we are going to connect Kintone to the project. So for those of you guys who have been waiting for React content, here we go. We're going to get started on that. And the first thing that we're going to do is connect our React app to our Kintone app. And we're going to have to work with our M file. Remember our .m file where we keep all of our secrets. In the code base, right here, that you've just get cloned, you're going to see a .m.example. Sometimes it's .m.sample, depends on what you like. And this is going to show you kind of like how to fill out your .m file. And .m files are also very picky. You have to fill them out in kind of, you know, specific ways because that's what the Kintone app and our upload tools are expecting. And this can definitely be the source of a lot of errors. So if you're finding like, oh, I just can't quite seem to get this work, you know, read the documentation after we're done here today. You're going to take this .env example and do not delete it. You are just going to copy and paste it and then rename the new one to .env, okay? I have a pre-prepared .env file, my project. You can see that I created it right here. And what you need to do is put in your base URL. So if you remember earlier, like your subdomain, so like mine was sean.kintone.com, right? So I'm just going to remove this example part. Don't mess with HTTPS. Don't put any slashes or anything afterward. Keep the quotes and just change this to your subdomain name, .kintone.com. Put in your username. It's probably going to be your email. And put in your password. And here we go. I told you, view ID. Hope you wrote it down. Go ahead and put in this into your .env file right there, okay? And if you filled this in correctly, then we'll be able to connect to your app with one more step, okay? So really just make sure that all of these are correct. There's your username. If you forgot your username already, you can look in your Kintone subdomain and it's right up there in the top right. So here's mine in the top right, just lowercase Sean. And the next thing that we need to do is we have our custom upload script that we have included in our code and we've installed it globally, right? You guys are going to edit this customize manifest.json file. And so go into the code, there's the customize manifest.json file right up here. And you need to put in what app number this is. For most of you, this is your first app. This is probably going to be 1. And the way that you can check this is if you go into your app, you can see up in the URL right there. This is app number 27 for me. You guys, it's probably going to be /k/1 for their first ever app. Put that number right up here and save this file right there. You should see it change, modified. And you're basically telling our Kintone customize uploader like, hey, when we run the script, you're going to be uploading to app number 27 and you're going to use this login information and you're going to be changing this view ID. So now we're going to get into this JavaScript and I need you to open up your index.js file. Right up here. So open up index.js, and this is the only other file that we are going to be editing today. Everything is living in this. This app is 100% pure JavaScript. There's actually, if you open up the CSS and HTML files, there's nothing in there except for this matching root div ID that gets appended to our custom view div ID that has root. Everything's going to be hanging off there in traditional React like fashion, and it's going to be all injected right into that custom view via JavaScript. Okay. So if you opened up index.js, first thing you're going to see is a bunch of imports, very, very common. We're importing React. We're importing the React DOM because we're going to be editing the DOM a little bit. And we have a couple of React tools that we're in here. We have use state, we have use effect, and use ref. And these are part of the React toolkit, and we'll talk about them later. You'll notice that use state is grayed out, And actually, we do not use state as it is in this app right now. But I've gone ahead and included it because if you wanted to expand upon this app, like let's say like I wanted to make a real-time shape adder. So like you have a form displayed on your 3D gallery, and you can, in the gallery, you could click like cube 567, and in real time, it'll need to like update and show the cube immediately. You're going to be probably using this use state and use effect. Otherwise, you might have to like reload the page in order for your cubes to show up. So if you're going to expand on this, you'll probably need use state, and that's what it does. If you're unfamiliar with React, use state and use effect, they are ways of reacting to changes within your app. And the state is how something is. Is there a cube there? Is it a tourist? Did it change in any way? And use effect is a way of tracking those changes with a function. And what it is used for is basically like when something else changes, you should change this. So like if someone were to add a new cube to our database, then you should update the list of cubes and display them, basically. They usually come together and work. And then useRef is, it is used here to basically kind of create a space in our Three.JS and React app where our Three.JS program is going to go. As you guys start to like grow and like, you know, make like bigger and bigger and cooler projects, they're going to get big. It's just unavoidable. And by using useRef here, what we're doing is telling React and our HTML code like, hey, we have something coming that's going to load into this app. It might take some time, but here's where it's going to go. And what this does is basically allows like your HTML and your React code to be like, okay, even though this hasn't loaded yet, I know that it's going to come here and it's going to fill up this space. So, okay, we're not going to bug out, basically. We have Three.js. We have our CSS, if you do want to edit some CSS. And we have our API call imported from requests/getRecords.js, which once again, if you want to see how the API call works, it's not super hard. You know, it's basically getting records by making a async request and you know, parsing the Kintone.api and getting these things, putting them into an array. So there's a lot of things in an array, right? An array of records or objects. Mapping these objects to a specific JavaScript object. So for each one of these records that we have, for each cube, for each tourist in our database, go ahead and make an object that has a length, a width, a depth, and a shape type, and then return that array. I use this boilerplate in a lot of my own personal apps. Okay. So we're going back to index.js. And the way that we like to inject custom JavaScript code into our Kintone apps is using a immediately invoked function, is what this is called right here. You might be like, this looks kind of weird. I understand that it's a function. I mean, it tells me that, but what's with the syntax? It is also called an anonymous function. It does not have a name. And the reason why we do this is because Kintone itself like has a lot of things going around in the background, right? It has a lot of functions, a huge code database. And if you were to accidentally name your function something that has a similar name or the exact same name as something that's being used in the Kintone web app, then it would cause an error and it would basically cause a scope issue where like, which one am I supposed to call? It's going to bug out a lot of things actually. And that's why we use anonymously invoked functions. These get assigned like really long randomized computer names basically. And so there's no chance of them ever, you know, kind of bumping into each other, so to speak. We're using strict mode for React. It's just a React convention to make sure that everything's nice and safe with how we input things. We're checking our view ID. This is all kind of boilerplate. And here's where the real magic starts to happen with our function of our app. Okay. I've left a lot of comments here. I tried really hard to make this really easy for you guys to understand. So here's where our useRef is going to get initiated. We have our mount ref right here, and you can just set it to null. It'll get filled up later. We have a renderer, which is part of Three.js. Our Three.js basically needs like a web.gl renderer. This is like how the kind of like nuts and bolts behind your app that shows like, how do I display a straight line, or how do I display the color pink? You know, your computer needs a renderer in order to do this, and Three.js uses a special renderer. So we have our renderer declared in a variable right here. We have some extra challenges that you guys can definitely take a look at later. I'm going to skip over those right now. And here is our use effect hook. This is part of the React magic. And by putting a use effect function right here, this gets run once on page load. And if you look at the scope of this use effect, where does this go? You see this line on my VS Code? Almost all of our code is going to go inside of this use effect hook. And what that is going to do is saying like when we load the page, aka like when we load our gallery view right here, you're going to do all this code. And what's going to happen inside the code is going to like set up, it's going to be like, okay, how many cubes do I have? How many toruses do I have? Where do I display them? How much do I spin them? What color are they? And it's going to display all of that on page load. Very common use case for use effect. Okay. We have our mount ref that we declared earlier, and we are going to append the renderer to it. This is all boilerplate, and if it looks kind of confusing, I'll be honest, this stuff, like I would not think to type this myself. This is all in the Three.JS kind of like documentation, and you know, you're not expected to memorize these kinds of things, right? As developers and programmers, you are expected to know like, oh, I can go to the documentation and find out how to set up a basic scene, or you know, some of us, like people joke about it, but like copying, pasting, and knowing when and what to copy and paste, it's a very important skill, you know. I'm not just like memorizing Three.js, like it's kind of a waste of time, to be honest, you know, unless you're like really using it professionally. All right, getting back into things, we have our scene, a new Three.js scene. And I picked a cool space background for you guys. You know, this is all set up, but you can edit it yourself later. You know, just change the URL right here to your favorite image. Make sure that's a good size though, otherwise it's going to be really blurry. We have our cameras all set up. So our camera is equal to a new 3 perspective camera. Perspective camera, and if you hover over things, you can see some tooltips, right? If you know a little bit about cameras, or if you play video games and you know what an FOV is, for example, or an aspect ratio. I'm not terribly, you know, like camera minded, or I don't have any film experience, so I kept all of these as the defaults as recommended by the Three.js documentation, which I do have linked to in the slides and PDFs. We have our renderer. We're going to set the size of our window to our window.innerWidth and window.innerHeight. These are just cool JavaScript functions that automatically get our windows width and height for us. That's very nice. We've moved our camera out. I think I said 30 earlier, but it's actually 70. Sorry. So we moved our camera out to 70, but it'll be a good distance. Our light is equal to a new 3 ambient light. So this is going to be a soft white light that kind of like glows throughout our whole magic space scene that we have going on here. And you'll notice that we've done this right here. We'll start to see this a lot. Scene.add light. And this is how we load things into our scene. Remember in the very beginning of our presentation a long time ago, we had like our scenes, we had our cameras, and we had our meshes, right? You need to add things to your scene with Three.js. So I imagine in that code clubs example that I showed you guys way back, that was like the 3D, you know, like sports facility. They probably have like a huge repeating function that loads things into the sports facility, like scene.add tree, scene.add building, scene.add car, scene.add person, you know, all these kinds of things. I have some cool like colored lights here just for some spiciness like that, and everything should be pretty readable, you know. You have position of the lights, you know, so you can add them like that. You can have the color of the lights and things like that. And once we've added all this kind of setup, we're going to get into the code along now. And this is where I want you guys to kind of code along with me. We have our records API call. And I want you guys to think kind of out loud to yourself, or if you're with other people, just think in your head, what do we expect our API call to have? Remember that we just made a Kintone app together, right? Like we just made our database together, you know. We created these fields for shape type, length, width, and depth, right? And our Kintone, basically API call, it's going to return our records array and our array of objects, which you can, once again, double check right here. It is returning these objects that are all bundled into an array and it's returning that array. So what we need to do is we need to loop through each one of our Kintone records and extract the length, the width, and the depth, and the shape type, and then do something with them, basically. So that's what we're doing right here. We have our get records. Then this is very, very convenient promise-based JavaScript stuff, saying like once you get the records, wait, this is an async function, wait for the result. Then with that result, because it's an array, so there's going to be lots of different things in there, right? For each part in that array, we're going to call it a shape. And that shape is going to have parameters of length, width, depth, and shape types. And you are going to assign these variables, length, width, depth, and shape types to them. We have a switch case right here. And the reason why I actually did a switch case here is because I wanted to make this app easy to expand upon. Because those aren't the only shapes out there, right? There's cubes, there's toruses or donuts. There's also, pyramids. There's all kinds of different shapes that you can make if you go dive into the Three.JS documentation. And all you'd have to do in order to expand this app is just add more cases to your switch statement right here. Remember earlier when I said that it is important that cube was a capital C and torus was a capital T? This is because we're doing string comparison. What we're saying is for this shape type that we just grabbed from our API call object, for each shape type, take a look at it. If it's a cube with a capital C, and remember that we did capital C's, right? If it's a cube with a capital C, then do this. It's basically a fancy if-then-else statement. So first thing we're going to do is choose a random color. Okay. The next thing, and you can see that I marked these with to do in the comments. So if you want to like Control F for to do and like speed ahead of me, go for it. That's totally okay. We have our wireframe of our cube. And remember that I said that we have these things called meshes. Meshes are made up of geometry, aka wireframes that you can't see, and materials, which are skins around them. Well, just looking at this like wireframe or this box geometry that we have set up, it no doesn't quite seem correct, right? And I've left these blank in order for you guys to, it's really not a terribly like difficult problem. But what I want to say is that like you don't need to memorize Three.js. VS Code and also documentation does a lot of help for us. Here, if we hover over, we can see a constructor for a box. Like what kind of things are we expecting? You can see it has a width, a height, and a depth. So it's expecting these things. It's also expecting like width segments, height segments, or depth segments and things like that. And if you were to go further into the Three.js documentation, actually, you would actually find that you don't need, these are all optional parameters, and you can actually just do box geometry, and this will automatically fill in with a length, width, and depth of 111 for you. But we don't want that. We have people like actually entering into our database like cool lengths and widths and making different custom shapes, right? So we don't want that. We want our width, our length, and our depth. And I'm doing this in that order because right here it says, we want our width, our height, aka our length, and our depth, So once you've filled these in, next, our cube material. This one's a pretty easy one, it's not terribly hard to figure out. But we have our cube material, which is a mesh standard material, and we're going to designate the color of it. You could put up into this color any color in hex code notation that you want. I have a little bit of 3.mathutils, which takes like a random integer and multiplies it by color, which will give you a random color. So I'm going to use our random color, but you could do any color you want. Totally cool. Here's our random color. We have a question from Joe right here. Why can I show more? I don't think I've done anything here like that. If yours is not doing enough, I know that you can like hold the, if you're on a Mac, like Command, or I think maybe it's like the Windows key on Windows, or maybe Control or Shift. If you like hold that over here, you can look at more detailed documentation. So maybe try doing that if you want. And there's also the Three.js like documentation itself. Like you can just type in like Three.js documentation into Google, and it's all right there. It's super easy. You can just search for cube geometry or box geometry, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to do and all the default values. I have an extra challenge for you guys if you want to try. Here's a different kind of material. Here we have a cube material, which is a mesh standard material. You could do a Phong material, which will have some different properties that you can play around with if you want. And working with Three.js, it is really about playing around, because you don't know how things look. It's a very visually oriented JavaScript library, right? You don't know things until you play around with them. So definitely play around with different materials, different, skins, and how they look. And you can make things look as cool or as flat or as shiny as you want, So lastly, we have our geometry kind of set up. We have our material set up, and we need to create a mesh. So here's our last to do. We need to combine them. Remember earlier I said meshes are, and you can see right up here, any geometry and any material. So we just made up here our cube geometry is a box geometry. That's a geometry. And our cube material is a mesh standard material. So let's go ahead and assign those variables to our cube. And it's going to be our mesh. So cube geometry and cube material. Boom. I have taken the liberty of positioning our cube semi-randomly. These are all kind of just magic numbers that I played around that like kind of work with our viewport. Definitely play around with them. And we add the cube. There we go. Our cube is done, guys. This is all that we need to do in order to get things rolling with our cubes. It's quite an interesting, I thought a long time about like how to present this workshop to you, because like I don't have all this memorized, although it's kind of intuitive, and I thank Three.js for that. It's a really fantastic library that's pretty easy to pick up, but like I don't have it memorized, So what I wanted to do was kind of give you guys a playground to experiment safely and intuitively. And so I hope that we could get that done with our cubes. Let's move on to toruses, right? We have another case for our toruses. And if you want to go ahead and zoom ahead, go ahead and try and fill these out for yourselves. Definitely speed ahead of me. We're doing for the same thing for our torus, create a new random color. And I noted, remember earlier I said that toruses don't have lengths, widths, and depths. That's correct. We have radiuses, tubes, and radial segments and tubular segments. What these things are, the radius is obviously, you've heard that before, right, with circles. It's like kind of like how big your donut is going to be. The tube is, I think, the inner part of the donut. So your second number is going to be like the size of your inner part of your donut. So if you make a geometry, or if you make it so that like, let's say like the tube is 100 and the radius is like 2, you might get some really weird geometry out there. So kind of play around with the numbers. Here, though, I'm just going to, it's expecting these integers, though, for our radius and our tube and our radial segments, etc. So we're just going to do, length. You could do width first if you want, it's fine, because we're kind of just replacing numbers. Width and depth. And these are going to be the dimensions of our torus, really, really similar to the cube, which is really, really nice. Three.js creates like this standardized way of creating all these things together. And our torus material is a random color. Thank you for capitalizing that for me, VS Code. And we are going to once again combine them into a mesh. And meshes take, just like before, a geometry and a material. So we have our torus geometry and our torus material. We're positioning our torus randomly, and we're adding it to our scene. And that is actually like the meat and potatoes of our code here today. I'm going to go through the rest really quickly, but this is basically like animation stuff that is kind of outside the scope of our workshop here today. And it's not something that is super advanced. Like I said, I actually just started with Three.js, I'd say like 3 or 4 months ago. We have an animation function. Things animate by frames, right? Like cameras have frames, right? Like 60 frames per second, right? And for each frame, we are going to go through our scene. Remember, our scene is our universe that we live in. And for each node, each part of our scene, if the node is a mesh, remember that we just added a bunch of meshes of cubes and toruses. If we find a 3.mesh, we are going to rotate it by a random number by 10. That's all. So that's our animation, and we're going to re-render our scene. So this is going to happen 60 times a second, unless you have like a really, really slow computer, in which case it's just going to try and do this at 60 frames per second. I have a convenient window resize function. So like if you were to shrink or maximize your window while you're looking at it, it should update automatically. This is all, once again, just in the documentation, boilerplate stuff. I would never write this myself. We're running our animation function that we designated up here. And this is a cool part of React. When you leave a page, in a large JavaScript app, when you're moving around pages and stuff, you would not want to have those resources of your scene saved as they are, normally. Like if someone is moving away from that page, they're not going to see it, or you might want to reset it, so you would destroy all these objects, and that's what this does. We have our mounted Three.JS canvas. There's that mount ref that we set up all the way in the beginning. And we have react.dom.render in strict mode, and we are rendering our app that we designated right above. And we are hooking it onto the root, which you guys put into the custom view. That's it. So let's go ahead and save these changes. Make sure you save it. And then go back to your terminal. And we are going to upload our customized JS into our app. And we have a script ready for you guys right here that's going to start up our Kintone Customize uploader that we install globally. Some of it is going to be in Japanese, depending on your system language, I think. Genji, if you have your system language in English, does this come up in English? I think it does, right? Yeah. And what this will say for you, though, is like I uploaded your customization, I've uploaded your CSS, you've changed it, and we're showing the changes, and we showed the change, or the changes have been reflected, and now we're waiting for files. It's going to watch for changes in your files. And so now, if you were to change something, so like if you're like, you know what, I want to rotate this by 50 instead and make it rotate really fast, and you were to click save on your file, this would automatically upload your file changes for you. You wouldn't need to run npm run start again. So here's a moment of truth. We're in our app. I always get a little bit nervous because sometimes it does take a little bit to reflect the changes. I'm going to check this out real quick. Good old console. Open up your developer's console right over here. But it should tell you your view ID from your app and your view ID that you put into your env. It'll also spit out errors. So like if you forgot to capitalize, there you go. Hey, it just took a little bit of time. That is an ugly donut. It looks like a bagel almost. Make the inner radius a little bit larger than that. Maybe I'll do that in a little bit. Finished our workshop right here. I'm gonna just keep adding a couple of shapes for fun and edit that ugly torus. Let's do a long cube. Let's do 12, 20, not 42, 23. We'll do 20 and that. Go back to our app gallery. Ooh, Ooga Booga. Don't change it to Ooga Booga. And for those of you who are, they're like, yep, I got this, no problem. Definitely take a look at some of these extra challenges. I have a challenge up here about refactoring, because refactoring is a really important process. And if you want even more challenges, here's a couple of ideas. If you're interested in what we do here at Kintone, and we're always actively hiring. That's not just like empty, like actively hiring, like we're hiring. Definitely scan this QR code. There's the article Will wrote talking about like the global developer advocate position. Yeah, guys, thank you for coming tonight.